Okay, I think we're live. Hello
Okay.
everyone. Say hi if you can hear us. So we know people are there again.
Hello.
No one yet? Let me check that we're on my phone. Can anyone hear us? Oh, we've got Hannah. Hi Hannah.
Hello, Hannah.
And Megan. Amy. Hi everyone. There we go. I think we've got a few. Can someone just comment to make sure they can hear us? Yeah, Megan, hear us? Okay, I think we'll just go for it and hope for the best.
Okay.
So hi everyone, this is Isabel Jordan from Leicestershire Infant Feeding Support. She's going to do a live antenatal class for you today. She'll hopefully answer a lot of the questions that you've been asking in the group. And if you do want to know if she's speaking, please just comment and I can read them out to her. At the end of every topic, she will ask if we've got any questions. I do have Martha on me, so hopefully she'll be good for us. She's due a nap an hour ago and she's still not gone, so fingers crossed she's good, but if not, it's more realistic. So Isabel, over to you.
Okay, hello, I'm an IBCLC and that's a lactation consultant, and I've been a La Leche League leader for 15 years or something, so I've been helping mothers for a very long time. Anyway, we've got quite a bit to get through. I don't want to rush it though, so I thought we'd start off with what do I need to start breastfeeding? So basically the things that you need are coming to sessions like this, getting informed are the main things, being prepared to, wherever you're giving birth, making sure that the baby's got access, obviously, to your breasts, otherwise that could be quite difficult. And I also wanted to spend some time talking about antenatal expression of colostrum, because I know it's out there. People often ask this question, and people wonder whether or not they should do it. If you're anticipating problems, or you've got gestational diabetes, or you've had a complicated pregnancy, it might be worth you considering this more perhaps than if you have had a straightforward pregnancy. It's recommended that after 36 weeks that you do this. If, however, for whatever reason you're expecting a baby earlier, it might be worth thinking about the week before the baby's due to be delivered that you do this. I don't really want to spend a lot of time talking about preemies or anything like that. I just want to do basic antenatal breastfeeding session, but that's the advice. So in order to express antenatally, the idea is that you prepare your breast first. So it might be worth having a shower, making sure your breast is warm. You may have noticed some leaking of colostrum, I don't know, from your breasts. It can come in various different colours, and that's good, but some mothers don't notice it, and that's fine as well. It's important to mention that you don't need to do this, but some mothers feel it's reassuring. So I don't know if you can see my breast, it's multicoloured. And so basically preparation is key here. So you do lots of massaging towards the nipple, and if you run your fingers towards your nipples, some people used to say an inch behind the nipple, but if you feel a difference in anatomy, it sort of becomes a bit more ropey, I like to describe it as, then you just squeeze there. And I don't know if you can see that properly. It's that kind of movement. Don't cause pain. If you cause pain, it stops a letdown. If you get some beads, they're like little beads of gold often, then that's the colostrum. If you want to stop there, that's fantastic. It showed you how your breast works, where your baby's mouth needs to be when it's breastfeeding. It's often quite far back. I don't know if you can see that. My thumb's at the top there and my finger's at the bottom. So the baby's mouth has to be quite far back when they're breastfeeding. And it's a useful skill to learn before you start before you have your baby, because you may need to hand express some colostrum into a baby's mouth urgently, or you can harvest the colostrum. In order to harvest colostrum, it's useful to have a syringe. 1 ml syringes are useful. This is a special colostrum collector, but it's basically a 1 ml syringe. I hope you can see that. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Yeah. And you can remove the plunger and scrape it off your breast like that, or don't fill it because you've got to put the plunger back in, or you can just aspirate it off the breast. So that was a really quick go over antenatal expression of colostrum. I don't know if any of you have noticed any colostrum leaking, or whether you have or whether you have, it's not important, but that's a very, very quick run through how to collect colostrum. With that, you then put that in the fridge. Actually put it in the freezer, because you don't know when your baby's going to arrive. Generally, we don't know. And it's really quick to defrost it. You don't need to heat it as such. At room temperature, it defrosts quite quickly. And then you've got some colostrum should you need it. If your baby comes out and attaches to the breast, then don't give it. You don't have to. But it's sometimes useful to have a backup. I just really wanted to do that really, really quickly. Yeah. So, does anybody have any questions about that or anything?
Nobody's posted anything yet. Speak now. If you forever hold your peace.
Oh, just to quickly recap, colostrum is the first milk you get. It's very thick, very gloopy. It's a laxative. It helps babies poo out that first poo. For anybody that's had a baby, it's black, sticky, horrible meconium, it's called. And the baby needs to pass it to make sure that everything's going okay, basically. Yeah. It also has tons and tons of antibodies in, and it's more about protection, really, as colostrum than actual nutrition, although there are some nutritional benefits to colostrum, obviously. Okay, that's the first bit.
Questions, so
Sorry?
Nobody's asked any questions about that, so keep going, and if they ask, I'll ask next time. So,
the birth. I just wanted to go over how the birth can affect breastfeeding. Ideally, in an ideal world, babies would be born vaginally with minimum intervention and very few drugs being given to the mother. And in an ideal world, I understand that some mothers have elective sections, and that's fine. But it's understanding how these things can affect breastfeeding. It's really important to understand this, because then we can work with it afterwards. If a mother receives lots of IV fluids, for example, during labour, this can go through to the baby and artificially up the baby's weight, as it were. The baby can come out really swollen, and it often takes about 24 hours for that to go away. So that's really important to remember. When day 5 the baby's weighed and the baby's lost a lot of weight, whereas actually it might have just offloaded some fluid. Drugs can affect breastfeeding. I mean, medication, so things like epidurals can make babies a bit more sleepy, maybe for 24 hours or so. Pethidine is another one that can make a baby really, really sleepy. And other interventions like forceps and Ventouse can have an impact on whether a baby latches quite well afterwards. So they're all good things to remember. Sorry, I'm just making a note of something.
Somebody's asked a question, sorry, just going back to the breastfeeding. Patsy said, if I'm having my second baby and still breastfeeding, when will my milk change to colostrum?
To colostrum?
Yeah.
So just to make sure I've understood, she's still feeding a child through pregnancy?
Yes. Are you pregnant, Patsy? I didn't realise you were having another baby. Congratulations. She's one of my clients.
Okay.
Yes. Said if I'm having my second baby and still breastfeeding, so I assume while she's still breastfeeding her son and she's pregnant, she's just asking when it will change.
So it's often around, we think it's around 16 to 20 weeks ish. Often what happens is the milk dries up first, and we're all different. We all respond differently to hormones. You will notice when that happens, often a baby will start to nurse more frequently because the milk's not coming through as it was before. Sometimes it becomes more annoying to breastfeed. You can get aversion, nursing aversion, which is not wanting to feed your older child. You can feel sick while breastfeeding, and your nipples become more sensitive, and you may describe that as painful. It doesn't happen to all women, and we're all different. Sometimes your milk doesn't dry up, sometimes it does, and some women get some of these symptoms and some don't. You may notice the colostrum come in because your older child may get a bit more runny poos or diarrhea, but actually it's the laxative effect of the colostrum. So yes. Okay, can't remember where I was. Okay, the birth. Right, so how to get breastfeeding off to a good start is what I've got next. Is there any other questions?
Carla's asked, is it okay to alternate between breast milk and formula?
It's ideal if you can stick to breastfeeding until it's established, and then you can introduce mixed feeding a little later, because your supply is a little more resilient. Initially, when you're trying to establish your supply, it may be that if you do that, formula may take over quicker. If you give a bottle of formula, not only do you often replace one feed, but some children, not all, become more sleepy with formula, so you're more likely to miss a second feed. And the way that breastfeeding works, which is the more you feed, the more you make. So the more the baby feeds initially at the breast, the more breast milk you'll make, and you'll titrate your supply to the baby's need. So how do I get breastfeeding off to a good start? Well, as I've already mentioned, the first milk is colostrum, and it's there for several reasons. It's thick, it's gloopy, and it doesn't come in huge amounts, because a baby, when it's first born, for the first 3 or 4 days or so, needs to learn to breathe, swallow, suck, and to do all those in order to survive. Up to now, it's done those things, a lot of those things, sucked its thumb, swallowed amniotic fluid, weed, not pooed, it hasn't pooed in utero. But now it's got to do all of those things, organise them, and do those things to survive. So colostrum, that's one of the reasons that colostrum comes in very, very small amounts. The other reason is a baby's tummy is quite small. Don't like really to put a figure on that because the research around that has changed, but I like to use my thumbnail. I don't know if you can see my thumbnail, but we've all got different sized thumbnails, different shaped thumbnails. And if you imagine that your baby's stomach is about the size of your thumbnail-ish, then that's the amount of food it can take. But you don't really want to fill it completely. Filling it completely would be like us, having a 5-course meal. And that's why babies often feed very, very frequently. Mentioned that colostrum's a laxative, and it also lines the gut, because the gut, when the baby's first born, is very, very leaky, and colostrum sort of seals that and makes it safer and helps protect the baby from any pathogens or bugs that might be around. One of the things that can be really, really, really helpful to get breastfeeding off to a good start initially is skin to skin. You may all have heard of skin to skin, I don't know, but putting the baby after it's born, looks like you're in luck there, by the way, she seems sleepy.
Going off, yeah.
Trying not to tempt it. So when the baby's first born, ideally it would be placed on your chest or on your tummy. I don't know if you can see my baby. It's a doll, by the way. Just and if it's placed here, they will often and left there for. We talk about an hour, but as long as the baby needs. Often they might be a bit sleepy and need a bit of time to recover from the birth, but eventually they will flip and move and latch on themselves. Ideally, that would be great if that happens, if that's allowed to happen. Yeah, that would be great. Skin to skin does all sorts of other things. It's not just a nice cuddle after the baby's born. It helps to regulate the baby's heart rate, breathing, respiration, temperature, all of those things. It also has an effect on the mother. It helps it helps her release all the mothering hormones and all the hormones that are in charge of lactation. So it helps her, oxytocin is one of them. It helps her let down her milk, but that generally happens when the baby latches on and breastfeeds. But it also helps maintain the hormone called prolactin. Both of these hormones are mothering hormones, so they have an effect on the mother's behaviour and help her bond with her baby. So skin to skin, even if you don't want to breastfeed, is a really, really, really good thing to do. It's good for both mother and baby and helps keep both of them calm and relaxed. So breast crawl. I sent a link to, I can't remember your name at all. Lucy.
Jade.
Sorry. Jade. There's it's the breast crawl. I don't want to show that now, but if you have that link, it's a really good link to watch. I think it's about 20 minutes long in itself, and it shows you the kind of behaviours that a baby initiates when it does the breast crawl. It looks really uncoordinated, and often babies will flip and throw themselves off. You do need your arms to make sure that that doesn't happen. And it can take quite a while for a baby to self-attach if that happens, say an hour, maybe longer. So it's always giving yourself time to do that. So the next thing, is there any questions at all?
Going back to the breastfeeding and bottle feeding, Sarah's asked, when would you recommend to breastfeed and bottle feed if they're planning on doing both? How long would you leave it to introduce the bottle?
I would say we tend to recommend about 6 weeks. Some babies can handle it earlier than that. Some babies can handle it later than that. Sometimes what happens, the reason we say about 6 weeks is they think, nobody's ever done a study on this, but they think that it takes about 6 weeks to establish your milk supply. I suspect through experience, some mothers do it a lot earlier than that. Some it takes a bit longer, just depends on all sorts of myriad of things. But we say 6 weeks. There is a point where a baby, if they've been exclusively breastfed, will refuse a bottle. That, again, is a movable feast. Sure exactly to give you, it's very difficult to give timelines. Often it's around 4 months, but, it could be any time. So we recommend about 6 weeks before you introduce a bottle. If they do refuse a bottle, it's often useful to try a cup. Generally from 6 months, a baby can take a cup, but sometimes earlier it can be useful if you're struggling with a bottle. Always, by the way, if you are trying to introduce a bottle, always start with the cheapest, because there's no such thing as a bottle that's made as close to the breast, really. And if you start with the cheapest, you tend not to waste loads and loads of money on teats and bottles and all sorts of other things. Always, if you want to continue breastfeeding as well, use paced bottle feeding, which you can look up on YouTube. I don't really want to go into that right now, but yeah. Okay.
Is that the same for pumping as well? When you introduce a pump, is that at 6 weeks if you were starting to experiment?
Okay, so pumping, if there's a lot of separation, if you have a baby in NICU, obviously you've only got a pump to establish your milk supply. If breastfeeding's going well, if you've got the baby latched on properly, there's no weight gain issues, there's no milk transfer issues or anything like that, baby's pooing, weeing, it would be, yes, I would wait. Because the reason for that is if you start pumping earlier than that, you can induce too much milk. And you may think that that's great. Well, it isn't, because you can have problems with flow, babies getting too much milk too quickly, mastitis, if there's too much milk and the baby can't get it all off, or you're struggling to actually get it all off, and you're struggling to find the time to pump. So yes, I would say, so if you can wait for 6 weeks, yes, but there are circumstances where you have to use a pump earlier than that sometimes. Yes. Latch. So latch, that's what I wanted to talk about. Latching a baby to the breast, and the other thing is making sure that they're actually transferring milk is really, really important. I don't know if you can see my sock. This is my baby's breast, yeah? No, mouth, not breast. My baby's mouth, and this is my breast. So when a baby latches on, ideally they'd take more from underneath than from on top, and I don't know if you can see, but the nipple runs along the top of the mouth, and it needs to have a good mouthful like that. This is no good, and the reason for that is that the nipple is running along the hard palate. If you get your tongue, get it behind your teeth and run it towards the back of your mouth like that, you'll get to a place at the back where you feel the soft palate. Your nipple needs to be at that junction between the hard and soft palate. If it's not there, it rubs and it hurts, and that's when we can sometimes get pain and trauma. So getting that nipple back in the baby's mouth is really, really important. And the way that we do this, I'm hoping that you can see, is so we plant the baby's chin on the breast. I don't know if you can see that. And baby will tip their head back, which is really, really important. My baby's head is quite far back. Then they open the mouth. My baby won't open the mouth, and go on like that and take a good mouthful. The video, the clip that I've sent is much better than what I've just tried to show you right there. So I strongly recommend that you have a look at that and see what I mean. And the baby's mouth needs to be quite wide like that. We talk about a K shape. So imagine that's a K, and the back mouth needs to be like that around the breast. The other thing that it's really important to mention is that some babies can hang out on the breast, not cause any pain, but they're not actually sucking effectively. And they're almost flutter sucking, so they're sort of doing this, which is not very effective. They might be getting some milk, and these babies will hang out at the breast for hours and hours and hours and hours. And often mothers think they're feeding, but they're not. It needs to be a really good massage of the breast, looking for swallowing, sucking, ears moving, that kind of movement of the mouth. And often they come off asleep. Another really good thing to look for is often a baby will start with their fists like this. Sorry, it's not useful to have, like that. And as the feed progresses, they go like that. And that's how you know that generally speaking, a baby's had a really good feed. The other thing is that what's coming out of the other end. So wee, poo is really, really important. I'm kind of jumping a bit all over the place because with breastfeeding, one thing leads into another. Where's my nappy? So I don't know if you can see my nappy. So, yeah, poo, the initial poo that I mentioned earlier, which was meconium, is this black tarry stuff. Obviously, this is a representation, it's not the real thing. Then, generally speaking, that's the black tarry stuff. Then it moves on to, that's got green flecks in it. Then it goes green, then it goes maybe brown, and then yellow. This happens within the first week. Often we talk about day 3, it goes yellow, and it's yellow, runny, seedy poo, which is perfectly normal, and it tells you that the colostrum is finished, that you've got mature breast milk, and that the baby's getting enough. Initially, you'll get maybe 1 or 2 poos on the first day, and it gradually increases over that first week. By the time you've got yellow runny poo, what we would like, ideally, is 4 to 5 pooey nappies and 5 to 6 wet nappies. Now, I'd also like to talk a little bit about that. As long as you've got straw-coloured or clear urine, your baby's hydrated. These days, we've got these disposable nappies with the line changes colour on them to tell you the baby's weed. And generally speaking, you feel the weight of a nappy and you can tell whether that's a full nappy or not. I would like you to, another thing that I normally do in a face-to-face antenatal is I have a nappy and fill it with some water. And if you feel the difference in weight, so I get about 30 mils, pour it on a nappy, and that's a wee. Sometimes they come off completely sodden, and that's okay. But obviously, they're getting, if you've got really heavy nappies, they're hydrated. In terms of poo, if the baby, so we like yellow, seedy poo after, it's gone through the transition and you've got mature breast milk, usually about day 3, 4, 5, depends. So we talk in terms of 4 to 5 pooey nappies, but sometimes a baby will do less than that, but there's more poo at the same time. Try to be a bit sensible about it. If the poo's going all the way up the back, then it's getting enough. Generally speaking, they will poo quite frequently up to about 6 weeks. So we would expect at least 2 or 3 poos a day, at least, up to 6 weeks. At 6 weeks, it changes, and the baby may poo once a day, once every other day, or even once a week. I had a mum used to come to one of my breastfeeding support groups. We had it on a Wednesday, and she said, "It's poo day." And this baby would poo every Wednesday, twice. But it wouldn't just be the nappy she changed, it would be the entire baby, because it was a poonami. It wasn't just, and that's normal after 6 weeks. Often, many health professionals, even now, which is deeply frustrating, will say that that's normal before 6 weeks, and it is not. It's something to be concerned about. If your baby's not pooing at least once a day before 6 weeks, then that is something to be concerned about. And it usually means the baby's not getting enough milk, and you need to contact someone and talk to somebody about it. So, I have talked about poo. Oh, I did want to talk about rescue techniques if things around birth don't go to plan, or there's a lot of separation, or there's a lot of, or baby's not feeding properly, or you are concerned that there's not enough poo or wee. Oh, bless her, she's
gone.
Am I disturbing her?
No, she sleeps for anything.
Okay. So one of the biggest rescue techniques that you can do, even if you're in hospital, say, for a couple of days, is lots and lots and lots of skin to skin when you get home. I mean, baby lives in skin to skin as a rescue technique. I remember one mum quite a few years ago now talked about the fact that she'd spent virtually the first 3 weeks in bed with her baby in skin to skin. And that's kind of what I mean. Obviously, you may have practicalities around that, although I'm not so sure about it right now because we're all kind of stuck in and no visitors. But as much as you can possibly manage as a rescue technique. If you think sometimes it's just an unconscious feeling or an instinctive feeling that things aren't quite right, then loads and loads of skin to skin can really help. So how to tell my baby's getting enough milk? I've already touched on this, but it's basically looking at nappies without weights. And I have heard that getting babies weighed after that initial period is a bit erratic at the moment. So it's looking at the baby. I've already talked about how a baby comes off the breast when they've had enough. It's a bit like the one I'm looking at right now. We talk about being milk drunk. So they are really drunk. They're kind of floppy. You lift their arm up, it's floppy. The hands are relaxed. They're sleepy. That tells me that a baby's had a good feed. The mucous membrane, so eyes, nose, mouth, they're moist. That suckling, I'm sorry, I've got a cat going nuts in the background.
The other day, my cat on a live video was him yelling at you the whole time.
So it's watching the feed as well, that deep latch, that suckling. So often a baby will go on first and suckle really, really fast to get that letdown going. Then you'll notice dramatically that change to going gug, gug, gug. And there's a slight, I won't say click because that means something else, but it's almost a soft k, 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 and that's swallowing. If you can hear swallowing, ideally we want it every 1 or 2 sucks. 3 sucks is okay. Any more than that, we start to get a bit worried. The poo. So I talked about straw-coloured wee and yellow poo after it's gone through that transition. The other thing is normal baby behaviour. Often you'll feed a baby for maybe 20, 30 minutes. It will come off, be asleep, you'll put it down, 10 minutes later, crying, and you have to come and pick it back up again. This isn't necessarily about food. This is about the baby not wanting to be put down. You can't put a baby down and say, sorry, love, I'm just going off to do my, washing up or going to the toilet. They don't get that. If they can't hear your heart rate, breathing, all of those things, they start to panic. Well, not panic immediately, but there's a whole process they go through before they start crying. Working around this is crucial, really. And something that mothers really, really find useful is getting a sling that you can put a baby in and keep them here, and you have one arm free to do stuff. Sometimes you may find that as the baby gets a little bit older, if you hold a baby for, say, 20 minutes or so, to do the arm drop test, if it does that, then you can put the baby down and you might get half an hour if you're lucky. But babies, what I'm trying to explain is that babies really, 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 really do need their mothers quite a lot in that. We talk about the 4th trimester, which usually lasts maybe, another 3 or 4 months. They really, really do need their mums very, very intensely. Are there any questions?
No, nothing's popped up. But I will just say from a personal point of view, the sling was a lifesaver for me, and we used it until literally a few months ago. It says use up to 3 years old, but there's no way I can carry her around now. She's too heavy. But honestly, I could get jobs done, I could work everything. It was brilliant. So they're only about £12 on Amazon, so I'd really recommend the fabric one that I use. So
yeah, and I have to say that with a second child, oh my God, it was indispensable. I was quite scared to leave my second child anywhere near my older one for many months. They don't all react like that, can I just say that right now, but it was an issue, and I couldn't put him down for a long time until I felt that he could actually defend himself a bit. I have teenagers now, so it's, although that throws its own issues. Anyway, right, sleep is another thing that I wanted to address. So sleep, many of you will have heard stories about sleep. Towards the end of your pregnancy, you might not have got much sleep because it's actually nature preparing you for what's about to happen. So yeah, babies, well, there is a range of what's normal for a baby to sleep in a 24-hour period. And the person that's done a huge amount of research on this is someone called Helen Ball. It might be Helena, I can't remember. I have met her, she's a wonderful person. And she's written a huge amount about this, including some very useful tear-off sheets. And she has a website called Basis Online, which I do recommend you go and have a look. But so a baby will sleep between 8 hours and 18 hours a day. And that range is perfectly normal. And obviously there's a massive difference between 8 and 18 hours. And anything in between is also normal. However, they don't do it all in one go. They tend to, because of that size of that tummy, and also a lot of it is about brain development, they tend to do it in shortish bursts. So it's not uncommon for a baby to have 2 to 3 hour cycles, and every 2 or 3 hours they need feeding, and then they'll sleep for a while. And this carries on over a 24-hour period. Often when a baby's first born, they haven't got a clue what is day and night, and they may well be up at night thinking it's the daytime. And you may notice towards the end of your pregnancy, babies are more active at night, and that will give you an inkling of what's going to happen when they arrive. They do sort it out eventually. And actually Helen, I heard her speak recently, and she'd just done a lot of work in Australia, and oh gosh, I've forgotten what I was going to say completely. Yeah, she basically, that went, it'll come back in a minute, but she said basically it was best to try and go with it, and gradually it will change. If you're really, really struggling, and it's a bit later down the line, when a baby gets up in the morning is rather crucial. Actually, probably where you are about now, Jodie, getting a baby up early and being awake early and getting everybody moving early in the morning is crucial to building up. I can't remember what it's called. I'll come back to it. Anyway, it's not relevant for newborns. But yeah, so if you can try and go with it. The other thing is co-sleeping. So I'm sure many of you will have heard about co-sleeping. Whether or not to do it, is it dangerous, is it not, all of this stuff. So the reason we address this in antenatal sessions is if you're breastfeeding, it's going to happen. The reason that is going to happen, that you sleep with your baby, is that the hormones that you produce when you're breastfeeding make you drowsy, you fall asleep. And fighting that can be quite hard and stressful. So the recommendation is that you try, having the baby as close as possible at night means that there's less disruption of sleep and that the baby tends to get more milk. If you choose to co-sleep, it's really important to do it safely, and there are guidelines on doing it safely. The main things are: don't drink alcohol, don't sleep on a sofa with a baby or a reclining chair, don't take any drugs, medication that would make you drowsy, like sleeping tablets, or some painkillers can be drowsy. Codeine, which is not really recommended when you've just had a baby, can make you drowsy. So avoiding those things, they're the main ones. But I would strongly recommend that you look up Basis online, which I think I've given you a link for, but I will later. Sorry if things popped up on my screen. Yeah, so it will happen. It's best that you're prepared for it to happen, and that you've thought about the environment that you're going to sleep in, whether your baby's there or not, before it actually happens. They're the main things that Helen Ball said are really, really important when breastfeeding and thinking about sleep. Oh yes, I've forgotten to mention something. Engorgement. Day 3. So when your milk comes in, after the colostrum has sort of finishes, although it doesn't just sort of finish, there's a transition between colostrum and mature milk. Many mothers complain of getting engorged, And I call it the Dolly Parton effect. I don't know if any of you've heard of Dolly Parton or know who she is, but she does have rather large breasts, and it is a bit like oh my god, what happened overnight? It can be quite painful, and sometimes some babies struggle to get latched on, because what happens is, you can see my breast, the breast sort of goes flat like that, and there's nothing to sort of grab hold of for the baby. They need a hook almost to get latched onto. So if the main things around this are IV fluids in labour can precipitate this happening. You need to keep feeding very, very, very regularly and emptying that breast very, very regularly. Sometimes hand expressing, which I talked through earlier, hand expressing some milk off before you latch the baby on can give the baby just something to grab hold of and get latched on. Taking ibuprofen if you can. I mean, if you haven't got an underlying condition that means that you can't take ibuprofen. Ibuprofen is really good because there's an inflammatory response, and it's an anti-inflammatory, and it stops that inflammatory response and helps all the inflammation calm down and helps the milk flow. And they're the main things. Cabbage leaves help. You can pop them in your bra, and there's an enzyme in the cabbage. If you scrunch up the cabbage first, that helps relieve engorgement, because some of it is not about milk. It's about lymphatic tissue and swelling going to the area. Some of it's obviously milk, to get all of that going, and it does subside after a while. Sometimes it can take a couple of weeks. Often mothers have phoned me in the past and said, oh, I've hit 6 weeks and I can't feel my milk. There's no milk in there. And it's not that. It's just everything's calmed down, gone back down. There is milk there. It doesn't just disappear like that. All that swelling's disappeared. I'm coming to the end of this. I've seemed to have rumped through it, but I did want to spend some time talking about what to do if things aren't going so well. The main thing is, if you're getting pain when breastfeeding or trauma, ideally we wouldn't get to the trauma stage, but I have seen a lot of trauma on nipples, unfortunately. If it hurts to breastfeed, then making sure that the baby is getting a really, really good mouthful. Sometimes something that can help is pulling the baby towards the other breast. Say I'm going to feed on this breast, just pulling the baby there, because the head has to go quite far back to latch on, and that can really, really help. Squeezing the breast in line with the baby's mouth, so not like that, because the baby will struggle, but like that. We call it sandwiching, so that you're getting a little bit more breast into the mouth. And if you can, I don't know if you can see that there, flipping the nipple back like that a little bit can help, because when the baby suckles, the nipple will be pulled further back into the mouth. Phone somebody that, if you're struggling, if you're not getting enough wet nappies or poo, that's usually a late sign, or it's really, really hurting, you need to phone somebody to come and have a look. At the moment, as lactation consultants are working virtually, and there's quite a lot we can do virtually to help you. The NHS has still got peer supporters out there working. I think they're working virtually. I know the infant feeding coordinators, because we do have an infant feeding team. In fact, we've got two in Leicester, one that covers the hospital and one that covers the community, are working via phone. I think most people around Loughborough.
It's covering all Leicestershire, Loughborough, Nottinghamshire. So
oh wow, okay.
It's quite a wide, but it's mainly Leicestershire people that are in here. But yeah, it does cover some people from Nottingham. Okay,
so yeah, get hold, or you can contact me if you want to, and I can give you a hand. But I'd recommend that you do it sooner rather than later. We'd rather see someone, earlier, because sometimes when you go and see somebody later, there is a problem on top of problem on top of problem, and it's quite difficult to unpick what's going on. So has anybody got any questions they'd like to ask me?
Zena did ask earlier, back to breastfeeding. She says, my baby latches on my right perfectly, but my left breast just doesn't happen. I've tried different positions with no joy. So is there any advice you can give on that?
So it's very, very common to suggest rugby balling on the side that they won't latch onto. I'm assuming she's tried that?
She's not said, she's just said she's tried multiple positions.
Okay, it's sometimes it might be worth using a shield on that side. Sometimes I usually recommend, if you've got one-sided problems, going to see an osteopath. That's quite tricky at the moment. Often it's because I don't know how old this baby is or what's happened during birth. Sometimes I did allude to forceps and ventouse. They can often cause these kinds of issues. Or sometimes if the baby's been lying at a particular position in the womb, they've got a stiff neck on one side, and it's that simple. And they find it really, really difficult to latch onto one side. Sometimes there can be issues, anatomical issues with the mother. Sometimes she's got an inverted or flatter nipple on one side than the other, and that can make it difficult. And sometimes she's got less breast tissue on one side than the other, and a baby will prefer one side depending on how it's feeling. So all of those things can play into that scenario. I would never, just because something doesn't work 1 week with a baby, they change so quickly, keep trying. It might be worth using a shield in that situation. I don't usually jump to that. I don't like to, but under the circumstances and working with this whole COVID thing, we are having to do things that we wouldn't normally do, but it might be worth trying a shield on that side.
Yeah, I had to use a shield from literally like day 5. I struggled so much, the pain was horrendous. So I was advised, use a shield, and it just took it all away. But the only issue with that, she would not take my nipple without. So if I was out and about and I'd forgotten a shield, or if I didn't have a clean one, she just would not latch. So it was great to start with, but it's just training them to go back on the nipple. And we never once got back to going on the nipple until we gave up. So it's good, it works, but then you have got that problem of...
Yeah, and that's one of the issues with shields, is trying to get rid of them. And if you are having problems like that, I strongly recommend that you get someone that knows what they're talking about to come and assess both baby and you and see what's going on and see if we can sort it out face to face, ideally, but virtually if not.
Hopefully soon we'll be back to normal. But,
hopefully.
We've got one more question. It's lagging on the laptop, so I'm going to read it from my phone. Alana, I hope I've said that right. I have quite flat nipples and my little boy struggled to latch. How would I avoid this time? I'm guessing with her first he struggled to latch and she's pregnant again.
Right, so it's always worth remembering that a baby doesn't nipple feed, it breastfeeds. So it's doing that sandwiching that I was talking about. Look at that global health media link that Jodie said that she'd post somewhere. Useful for me. Sorry, Jodie, I don't mean to be derogatory, but they're the main things. It's breastfeeding, it's not nipple feeding. So getting that good sandwich of a breast and getting the baby to open their mouth properly. Sometimes if you've got a pump or I haven't got a syringe that I can show you this with, I'll try and show you with this. Sometimes it helps, if you haven't got a pump, to chop the nipple end of a syringe off about there, pull the plunger out, stick it where you've chopped the nipple off. It would be a bigger syringe than this. This is only a 1 ml syringe. Put that bit over your nipple and pull. That will pull the nipple out. And sometimes that can help get a baby latched on. You can do it with a pump as well, obviously. If you have one, I don't recommend that you go out and buy a pump for that reason, unless it's really quite cheap pump. And then I question the usefulness of the pump. But unless it's just for pulling the nipple out. But if you've got a syringe, it's easier. Maybe a 10 ml syringe, 20 ml syringe, depends on the size of your nipple as well. And that can really help. If not, the last resort, and I mean the last resort, is a nipple shield, but ideally you'd be getting someone out to come and help you. I did recently help a mother whose baby wouldn't latch on for 6 weeks at all, and then finally after 6 weeks did latch on. So sometimes there are those scenarios that we can face, but if they're just flat and not inverted, that would probably help.
My 5-week-old appears to have silent reflux. He gargles a lot after feeds and often has bubbly spit in and out of his mouth. Any advice on this?
Right. Reflux can be overdiagnosed. We need to make sure that it's not overactive letdown and issues around that. With reflux, there are 5 things. First is latch. Working on that latch, and Jodie's going to post that thing. But I've gone through it several times with making sure that baby's got a big mouthful. Secondly is position, and with reflux it's keeping the bottom down. So I don't know if you can see, keeping the baby in that position, maybe with legs splayed across your knees, your leg, and the head back can help. And with reflux, if a baby does have reflux, putting them on their back is not a good idea, because the milk runs up the esophagus along with the acid and it burns. And often these babies will not tolerate being on their back for very long. So generally speaking, keeping them upright and keeping them in a sling can really, really, really help. Third thing is, and it may not apply here, is overfeeding with a bottle. If you're not using a bottle, that doesn't apply to you, but sometimes the temptation is to get a baby to finish a bottle and they've overfed and therefore the tummy's too full and the milk runs up the esophagus, and that can happen with formula or breast milk. So try to avoid that. Fourth thing is food allergy. The gold standard with food, if you suspect that is the problem, and it quite commonly is with reflux, the gold standard is to do a food diary and work out what food is the problem and exclude it from your diet. Very commonly it's dairy, but the gold standard, as I've said before, is to do a food diary and work it out from there. I will give Jodie another link that's very, very useful in terms of food allergy, which I haven't sent her, but I will. And the 5th one in terms of reflux is the microbiome, and that's just a bit of a nightmare at the moment because we don't actually know a huge amount of the microbiome. And giving babies probiotics, which is effectively the answer to that, is dodgy because you're giving a baby live bacteria and we don't know a lot about it. It's better for the mum to take the live bacteria and experiment that way than to give them to the baby.
Thank you. Does anybody else have any questions? I don't know if you've asked because it's behind a little bit, but I've not got any more popped up. And I keep laughing as well. My name's Jade, not Jodie.
Oh, sorry, Jade. Sorry.
Every time you say it, I'm giggling to myself.
Sorry. I've been talking to a Jodie.
It's fine. I'm just going with it. I know who you mean. I just thought I'd mention it.
Jade.
It's making a few people laugh anyway.
Okay. Okay.
I don't think there's any more questions. Nothing else has come through.
Okay. That's fine.
Yeah. No one else. Brilliant. Yeah, thank you so much for that. That was really informative. Hopefully it helped.
A few books that you might find useful. The Womanly Art of Breastfeeding by La Leche League. The Positive Birth Book by Amy Brown. And Sweet Sleep is all about sleep. And so there you go.
Perfect. And I will post those links as well to me. So I'll post in the comments. And yeah. If you have any other questions, then Isabel's kindly said you're welcome to message her privately. If you don't want to post it in the group, you can message me privately and I can pass it on, or just comment on this and she'll answer you at some point. So, and Martha's waking up now, so that's good timing. Well done. All
right then.
Thank you so much for that. And to everybody else, there's another live class tomorrow, which is pregnancy yoga. That's with Emma Healy from Sohum Yoga. That's at 4 o'clock and we'll be doing exactly the same as this. I'll be sat in the corner I'm not going to be doing it, obviously, but there is a few things that she said if you want to do it live with her, I'll post what you need to have ready. But yeah, so thank you so much, Isabel, that was really helpful.
Thank you.
So thank you, everybody. Bye.
Bye.